My husband's sister deliberately ruined my wedding cake. I ruined her entire life. My husband's sister deliberately ruined my wedding cake, destroying the only tangible piece of my late grandmother I had left. And in that moment of sugar-coated devastation, watching red velvet bleed onto the white marble floor of the venue, I decided that I wasn't just going to get mad. I was going to systematically dismantle her existence. It wasn't a decision made in a flash of hot red anger, though the anger was certainly there, burning in my chest like a swallowed coal. Rather, it was a cold, calcifying realization that the social contract between us had been irrevocably broken, and that the rules of civility no longer applied to a woman who would weaponize a wedding reception. Jessica had always been the sun around which the rest of the family orbited, a gravitational pull of narcissism and dramatic flair that sucked the oxygen out of every room she entered, and my husband, Mark, had spent his entire life acting as her personal atmospheric shield, filtering out the criticism and refracting her cruelty into harmless quirks. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the high-powered marketing executive who dazzled her parents with stories of Manhattan boardrooms and exclusive galas, while I was just the quiet accountant who kept track of things, the woman who married her brother and, in her eyes, stole her backup plan for emotional validation. The cake incident wasn't an accident, despite what she shrieked to the horrified guests as she lay amidst the ruins of fondant and buttercream, her designer heels kicking at the debris like a petulant child. It was a targeted strike, the culmination of 3 years of psychological warfare that I had foolishly tried to navigate with patience and grace. I stood there in my lace gown, a dress she had loudly criticized as quaint during the fitting, and I looked at the smashed remains of the vintage porcelain topper, two doves that had sat on my grandmother's wedding cake in 1952, the only heirloom I had asked to incorporate into the day, and I saw the smirk she tried to hide behind her hands. That smirk was the catalyst. It was the moment I stopped being the sister-in-law who tried to fit in and became the auditor who had just discovered a discrepancy in the ledger that needed to be corrected, and the correction would require a total liquidation of her assets, both social and professional. To understand why the cake was the final straw, you have to understand the architecture of misery Jessica had built around my relationship with Mark from the very beginning, a structure of undermining comments and exclusionary tactics that was so subtle at first I thought I was imagining it. When Mark first introduced us 3 years prior to the wedding, it was at a family barbecue where I felt distinctly like an organ transplant that the body was trying to reject. Jessica had arrived late, sweeping in with a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and she had hugged Mark with a possessiveness that bordered on the territorial, ignoring my outstretched hand for a solid 10 seconds before offering me a limp, dismissive shake. She spent that entire afternoon telling remember when stories that predated me, effectively editing me out of the conversation, and whenever I tried to contribute, she would smile that tight, pitying smile and say, "Oh, sweetie, you just had to be there," making me feel like a tourist in my own boyfriend's life. Mark, bless his conflict-averse heart, interpreted this as her just being protective and high energy, failing to see the calculated way she isolated me from his parents, interrupting me every time I tried to bond with his mother, steering the conversation back to her own achievements, her own crises, her own needs. She was the main character, and everyone else was just a supporting player who needed to hit their marks, and I was the unscripted extra who was ruining the aesthetic of her perfect family tableau. Over the years, the aggression became less passive and more overt, manifesting in backhanded compliments about my job. It must be so nice to have a job where you don't have to think too hard after 5 p.m. and critiques of my appearance disguised as fashion advice, telling me that my colors were too autumn for a spring event, or that my hair looked brave when I wore it natural. I absorbed it all, like a sponge soaking up dirty water.
Full story on channel link below.